Hi, I'm Brian E. Denton, author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Inspiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is part of a series I'm doing on Dante's Divine Comedy, wherein I'm reading through the entire Divine Comedy, all three books, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, at a rate of 3 cantos or chapters per week, and I'm offering my thoughts on all the cantos. I'm doing this as an independent contribution to Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project. If you haven't heard of the 100 Days of Dante Project, you really should. So be sure to click on the link I provide down below in the show notes. To any new viewers, first of all, welcome. I appreciate you being here, and I invite you to please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This month, the month of November 2021, we're trying to get up to 250 subscribers. We're at 229 right now, and it's towards the end of the month, so we're probably not going to get there. But hey, that's all right. We'll get there eventually, especially with your help, and I thank you in advance for that. In addition, for any newcomers today, you'll note that these videos are divided into separate parts. There is this introduction. The introduction will be followed by a synopsis, where I will offer an overview of the action and the plot. I'll follow this up with a characters and themes section. And after that, I'll have what I call a takeaway section, where I offer my own personal thoughts on the canto and how we can use it to live better lives ourselves. After that, I'll wrap things up with an outro. And then you just go wherever the YouTube algorithm takes you. So with all that said then, let's get right into it. Today's canto is Canto 33. We open exactly where we left off in Canto 32. Dante has noticed that there is a man gnawing on another man's head, and he asks this man why he's doing this. Reasonable question. The gnawer looks up at Dante, and then, in one of the greatest details in this entire poem, the gnawer uses the Gnawees' hair to tidy up his mouth a little bit, and then he launches into this long story about how he came to be in this particular region of hell. First, it's established that his name, the gnawer, his name is Ugolino, and the Gnawees' name is Archbishop Ruggieri. Ugolino says that there's really no reason to get into what transpired between the two of them, him and Ruggieri, because it's common knowledge. Well, that may have been common knowledge to people back in medieval times, but in contemporary times, we don't know what happened with them, so we're going to discuss that further in the characters and themes section. Suffice it to say that both Ruggieri and Ugolino committed betrayal against country, because they're in the region of XXXIII and Tenora, which is where those sins are punished. We do learn, however, that Archbishop Ruggieri did throw Ugolino into the Tower of Hunger, and it was here that Ugolino had a bad dream, which portended his future. That future, it turns out, is pretty bad. I'm confident in saying, in fact, that the story we're about to hear from this guy Ugolino is one of the worst stories in this entire poem. Definitely the most depressing. Get ready. The basic story is this. Ugolino wakes up from his dream, and he finds that he has been joined in the Tower of Hunger by his sons. He also hears that the door to the Tower of Hunger is being nailed shut. And so, without any water and without any food, he's left to expire by starvation with his sons. The hunger starts to set in, and Ugolino decides that the best approach is to engage in stubborn silence. He doesn't betray any of his emotions, although naturally he's feeling it because he's dying alongside his children and he's watching them die from starvation. Bad situation. By the 4th day, his children start crying out repeatedly for help. Things are really, really bad. And also on the 4th day, one of Ugolino's sons, Gado, dies. On days 5 and 6, his other children die. This consumes Ugolino in just unspeakable grief, naturally. And he dies from grief and also from hunger on day 7. And after relaying this uplifting story, Ugolino, down in hell, goes right back to gnawing on Ruggieri's head. And our two pilgrim poet heroes continue on deeper into XXXIII. They leave Antenora and they enter a region called Ptolemea. And these are where those who betrayed the rules of hospitality are punished. These sinners lay supine in the frozen lake of XXXIII. In fact, just a little bit of their face emerges from that frozen lake. And the wind here is so great, so strong, and so cold that it instantly freezes the falling tears of these sinners. So much so, in fact, that the tears form a kind of callus over their eyes, blinding them. One of these sinners asks Dante to remove the callus from his eyes, and Dante says that he'll do this for the sinner if the sinner gives Dante his name. And so the sinner gives Dante his name. This is Friar Alberigo. And so Dante talks for a little bit with Friar Alberigo, and he learns that there's something very curious going on down in this particular region of hell, Ptolemea. And what that curious thing is that the sin is so great of these sinners that the souls of the sinners are yanked out of their earthly bodies prematurely. That is, before the body dies. And the soul is deposited in hell, but the body goes on living up on earth. But in the meantime, that living body is possessed by demons. And that's basically where we leave it. Canto 33 is over, and there's only one more canto to go. In another great Italian work of art, The Sopranos, a pattern emerges, wherein the greatest episode of each season is the penultimate episode. This is the episode of the season where the season's plot climaxes, where the most drama unfolds. And we see a similar thing in the Inferno. The 33rd canto is the penultimate canto of the poem, and it is by far the most dramatic and the most interesting and the most important in terms of characters and themes, as we'll see today. In order to best understand this canto as Dante intended, at least as I believe he intended us to think about it, it's wise to first understand who these characters are. So that's what we're going to do first. To best understand who these characters are, we must think about where in Cocytus they're being punished. And the initial characters we meet in this canto are being punished in the region of Cocytus called Antenora. We were already introduced to Antenora in the previous canto, Canto 32, and we know that these are the people who are being punished for betrayal against country. The two characters that we find here are Count Ugolino and Archbishop Ruggieri. As I said in the synopsis, Dante doesn't spend any time allowing us to get to know these characters because he already assumes that his readership will know about these characters because their story was so popular at the time. Well, contemporary readers probably aren't too up to date on page 6 of the Medieval Post, so we'll take just a few minutes to tell their story. Here it is in a nutshell. Count Ugolino was from Pisa, and he was a part of the Ghibelline faction. You remember the Ghibelline and the Guelph fighting that we've discussed all throughout the Inferno. He's a part of that fighting. And he joins, however, with the Guelphs alongside of the Guelph Visconti family. And he's doing this, Ugolino, in an effort to advance his own interests in the interest of his family. This plot fails, however. He's found out and he's banished from Pisa, at least temporarily. Because when he comes back, what happens is he joins up with a fellow Ghibelline, and this is Archbishop Ruggieri, and they engage in a plot against Judge Nino Visconti, a Guelph. And you're going to want to remember this guy because he makes an appearance a little bit later on in Purgatorio. They, Ugolino and Ruggieri, succeed in removing Count Visconti from Pisa. And just when it seems like their plan has come to its full fruition and they're both going to benefit, Ruggieri gets it in his head to get rid of Ugolino. So he makes accusations against Ugolino, saying that Ugolino is involved in some real estate transactions that benefited himself and his family and hurt his native Pisa. And as punishment for all this, Ruggieri has Ugolino and his sons thrown into jail in the Tower of Hunger. And it's this scene here in the Tower of Hunger that we need to talk about next, because it is this scene that Ugolino tells Dante in Canto 33 today. First of all, this is one of those scenes that will be indelibly imprinted into your mind as a reader forever. It really sticks with you. At least that's been the case for me. I mean, it starts off with one guy, Ugolino, literally gnawing on another guy's head. And first we see that this is a gory, tooth-punctured head. It's nasty. In fact, it's so nasty that Ugolino has to remove all the gore from his lips with Ruggieri's hair. What an image. And it only gets worse. Once we hear Ugolino's awful story, frankly, we can understand at least a little bit why Ugolino has this hatred for Ruggieri that he has down here in the frozen lake of Cocytus. Imagine having to watch your own sons die of starvation in front of you. And this is all made worse by the fact that because his sons predeceased him, Ugolino almost certainly considered cannibalism as a means of offering himself sustenance. Disgusting. At any rate, of all the terrible scenes that we've encountered so far in the Inferno, this is the scene that always moves me the most. This is the scene where I too, as a reader, get closest to Dante in terms of wanting to cry out in pity, as we've seen Dante the Pilgrim do throughout the entirety of this poem. Except today. Note that Dante the Pilgrim does not show pity. He does not cry. And this, I believe, is why this particular canto is the most important canto in the entire poem. Dante the Pilgrim does not cry. He doesn't show pity, even though Dante the poet clearly wants his readers to show pity and to possibly cry. I say this because Dante the poet sets it up for us to feel pity for Ugolino. For if poetry is music, which it is, then Ugolino's tale is a musical refrain. Remember, back in the 5th canto, when Francesca tells us her story, here's what she says. And she to me, there is no greater sorrow than to recall our time of joy in wretchedness, and this your teacher knows. These lines, as Francesca indicates with her reference to Virgil, who is Dante's teacher in the poem, are basically the same as Aeneas's lines to Dido in the Aeneid. Beyond all words, O Queen, is the grief thou biddest me revive, how the Greeks overthrew Troy's wealth and woeful realm. The sights most piteous that I myself saw, and whereof I was no small part. The idea of memory producing grief and suffering appears again in this canto with Ugolino's story. Listen to what he has to say. Then he began, You ask me to revive the desperate grief that racks my heart, even in thought, before I tell it. So, Ugolino's in grief, we're in grief, everyone's in grief. Everyone except exactly who you would expect to be in grief at this point, Dante the Pilgrim. After all, this is the guy who's been crying throughout the entire poem, as I'm sure you remember, but not today. And even Ugolino asks him, why aren't you crying? This story is so sad. If any story would provoke tears, Ugolino says, then surely it's this. And you know what? Ugolino's not wrong. This is a terrible, terrible story. And this is exactly why I believe that this is the most important canto in the entire poem. This is the canto where Dante the Pilgrim comes to emotionally understand God's divine plan. Intellectually, he already grasped this, to my thinking anyway, back when he bareback rodeoed on Geryon down into the pits of hell. Even with this intellectual understanding of God's divine plan, though, Dante's instinctual, animal, and sinful side still moved him to pitiful tears, albeit less frequently, as it concerns the sinners down in the deeper regions of hell. Today, though, no, he's not moved, or at least he doesn't appear to be moved at all. He's definitely not crying. He doesn't say that he's full of pity. He just moves on. He hears Ugolino's story, and he moves to the next region of Cocytus. His intellectual and emotional essences are now married. He's ready, as it were, to move into purgatory. We see this idea reinforced in the very next scene. Dante simply moves on from Count Ugolino's horrible story and goes with Virgil into the next region of hell, Ptolemia. This is where those are punished who committed sins of betrayal against guests and hosts, essentially against hospitality. Here, Dante meets Friar Alberigo, who is buried in the frozen lake of Cocytus. Only the top of his face emerges from this frozen lake. And it's so cold, as I said in the synopsis, that his tears form this hardened, blinding callus over his eyes. Friar Alberigo pleads with Dante to please remove this callus from his eyes so that new tears may vent his grief. Dante says that he will if he gets Friar Alberigo's name. Friar Alberigo complies. He gives him his name and a quick story of what's going on in this particular region of Cocytus. And then, very importantly, Dante refuses to hold up his end of the bargain and remove the callus from Father Alberigo's eyes. So essentially what Dante is doing here is he is not only refusing to issue tears from his own body, he's refusing to even countenance tears from anybody anymore. He is, once again, both intellectually and emotionally invested in the idea of the wisdom of God's divine justice. And so, just as quickly as Dante moved on from Antenora, he moves on from Ptolemia. The ancient Stoics and the Christians share many philosophical similarities, more so I think than many of both parties are willing to admit, especially if you judge from the comments and internet comments sections, which if you want to maintain Stoic calmness, I would suggest you never do. In no space are these philosophical similarities more apparent than in the idea of acceptance. The basic Stoic idea is that in life there are things that are under our control and there are things that are not under our control. And basically, almost everything is not under our control. In fact, the only things according to the Stoics that are under our control are our own opinion about things and the actions we take in life. For the Stoics then, the virtuous person will accept all the things that happen that are outside of their control, while guiding the things that are within their control towards virtuous ends. Christians believe something quite similar. In the Lord's Prayer, the way that Christ himself taught his disciples and therefore us Christians to pray, we find that Christians ask that God's will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. We don't pray as Christians for our will to be done, the things that we want to see happen. We pray to God that his will be done. If then we pray that God's will be done, it implies that we should accept, like the Stoics, the things that God's will delivers. So the Stoics would say that nature delivers these things. The Christians hold that it is God who delivers these things. This is the lesson I believe that Dante the Pilgrim has learned over the course of the previous 32 cantos. This is his character arc. Remember that he starts this poem in an incredibly bad place. He's lost in the dark woods. He's confused. He's scared. And it's implied that he's not accepting of the divine plan. And we see this non-acceptance in various ways throughout the poem. We see that he tears up and he's filled with such pity as he learns of each sinner's punishment. He just cannot accept it. He doesn't truly understand, at least not fully until today. This is not the behavior of a man who has fully accepted God's plan. Again, not until this canto anyway. And look at who is punished in today's canto. We're primarily concerned with Ugolino. It's his story that takes up the bulk of today's canto. Is this a character who has submitted to his fate, as the Christians or the Stoics would counsel? No, he plots on earth to better himself, to better his family. In fact, he puts a very strong emphasis on his family's future, mainly his children, and what happens to him as a result of this plotting. He watches his children die in starvation, and this causes him unrestrained grief. Grief that is so intense that even in the afterlife, he feels as if he has to exact vengeance on Ruggieri, the man who did him wrong. And he does this by biting into his head constantly. Okay. All of this, according to both the Stoic and the Christian tradition, is truly wrong-headed. It does not show acceptance to the things either of God's will or the things outside of our control. And all of this shows the great difficulty of living a properly virtuous Christian or Stoic life. It takes a real commitment to and a severe wrestling with our human emotions to fully engage with the Stoic philosophy or the Christian faith. Stoic philosophy in the Christian faith demands that we break with our attachment to worldly things and commit ourselves to the transcendent divine plan. Interestingly enough, both of the traditions, the Stoic and the Christians, refer consistently to the logos, or the word. Now for the Stoics, this remains kind of ethereal and not well defined, the logos. But in the Christian faith, we have the logos being made flesh in the form of Jesus on earth. Right? So this is what we're supposed to submit ourselves to, the will of God or the things outside of our control. We're supposed to accept these things. Just look at the two following teachings from both schools of thought. Dante follows this wisdom up into purgatory and then paradise, leaving behind those in hell who could never accept them. The highest and principal form of training, and one that stands, so to speak, right at the entranceway to the enterprise, is that when you become attached to something, let it not be as though it were to something that cannot be taken away, but rather as though it were to something like an earthenware pot or crystal goblet, so that if it happens to be broken, you may remember what kind of thing it was and not be distressed. So in this too, when you kiss your child or your brother or your friend, never entirely give way to your imagination, nor allow your elation to progress as far as it will, but curb it in, restrain it, like those who stand behind generals when they ride in triumph, and remind them that they too are men. In a similar way, you too should remind yourself that what you love is mortal, that what you love is not your own. It is granted to you for the present, while, and not irrevocably, nor forever, but like a fig or a bunch of grapes in the appointed season. And if you long for it in the winter, you are a fool. So if you long for your son or your friend when he is not granted to you, know that you are longing for a fig in winter. For as winter is to a fig, so is every state of affairs that arises from the order of things in relation to what is destroyed in accordance with that state of affairs. Henceforth, when you take delight in anything, bring to mind the contrary impression. What harm is there, while you are kissing your child, to say softly, "Tomorrow you will die"? Likewise to your friend, "Tomorrow either you or I will go away, and we shall see each other no more." If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother, and wife and children, and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Alright, that concludes my video for Canto 33 of Dante's Inferno. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Remember that we're trying to get up to 250 subscribers by the end of November. We're probably not going to get there because we're only at 229 right now and it's already almost Thanksgiving, but maybe we can. And if we do, we're getting there because you helped out, and I appreciate it, and I thank you in advance for that. Now, more important than getting likes for the video or subscriptions for the channel is getting a conversation going in the comments section. What I'm interested in hearing today is what you feel about this canto. Do you agree with me that the most important part of the canto is Dante's refusal to engage in pity and cry, and that this represents his acceptance of God's divine plan? If so, why do you agree with me? If not, why not? I'm very curious to hear what you have to say, so let me know down in the comments section. Other than leaving comments, if you want to contact me, you can do so on Twitter. My handle is @BrianE.Denton. Now, there's only one more canto for the Inferno, and I fully intend on completing this video series, so we're going to continue with the Purgatorio, and eventually, God willing, with the Paradiso. And every video is going to be released on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. Sometimes I'm going to miss those, sometimes not. These take a long time to produce, and I have other things going on in my life, but I'm going to do my best to get them out there for you. I don't know when the next one's going to come out, but until we meet again, take care of yourselves and others. The Gnar.